Picture New York City on a Tuesday morning. The subway thunders beneath 10 million feet. Glass towers catch the October sun and throw it back in fractured gold. Somewhere in Midtown, a surgeon is repairing a human heart on a screen smaller than her palm. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a 16-year-old is uploading a video that will be seen by 3 million people before noon. In Newark, a cargo drone hovers over a warehouse, navigating by satellite signals bounced off metal birds orbiting 200 miles above the curve of the Earth. Now press pause. Hold that image in your mind. Every blinking light, every data packet, every engineered miracle of the last 10,000 years of human striving. And ask yourself one question. What if it's all happened before? Not metaphorically. Not as some vague philosophical suggestion. Literally. Concretely. What if the towers have risen and fallen, the libraries have burned, the satellites have gone dark and tumbled from the sky, and we have forgotten, so completely, so catastrophically, that we built it all again from scratch, convinced we were the first? What if the story we tell ourselves about human progress, that clean, reassuring arc from cave paintings to cloud computing, is not a beginning, but a chapter? Not the first chapter. Maybe not even the second. Maybe not the fifth. Here is the thing about that image of New York City. If something happened tonight, not a comet, not a nuclear exchange, just a prolonged collapse of the electrical grid, within 72 hours, the supply chains would begin to fail. Within 2 weeks, the city would be unrecognizable. Within a generation, the towers would be sheltering species that have no word for Manhattan. Within 1,000 years, the sea would be reclaiming what the sea always reclaims. Within 10,000 years, a person walking along the shore of what we now call the Hudson River would find, if they found anything at all, fragments they could not explain. And if they were honest, if they were the kind of person who refuses easy answers, they would look at those fragments and ask, who was here before us? That is the question this documentary exists to ask, not as entertainment, not as conspiracy, as the most serious inquiry available to a species that keeps losing its memory. Are we the first, or are we just the latest? Let's start at the beginning. Or rather, let's start at what we assume is the beginning, and see how quickly that assumption falls apart. We are taught that human civilization is approximately 6,000 years old. Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, the invention of writing, the wheel, the city-state. We are taught that before that, for 194,000 years, our anatomically modern ancestors were walking the earth in small nomadic bands, scratching at the soil, staring at the stars, and doing essentially nothing of consequence. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. Homo sapiens has been anatomically modern. Same brain volume, same cognitive architecture, same capacity for language and abstract thought and innovation for at least 200,000 years. The brain sitting inside your skull right now is functionally identical to the brain that was sitting inside a skull on the shores of a lake in East Africa 200,000 years ago. That brain could compose a symphony. It could derive calculus. It could wire a circuit board, perform a surgery, launch a satellite, write a documentary script about the nature of civilization itself. And we are supposed to believe that for 194,000 years, that brain did nothing remarkable. No cities, no monuments, no written records, no complex agriculture, just silence. And then, suddenly, approximately 12,000 years ago, something clicked. Agriculture appeared. Permanent settlements appeared. Monumental construction appeared. Writing appeared. Astronomy appeared. And within what amounts to an evolutionary eye blink, we went from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to the pyramids of Giza. That story has always bothered the people who think carefully about it, because it doesn't make sense. The hardware, the human brain, was the same for 200,000 years. Why did the software take so long to run? There are two possible answers. Answer 1. For most of those 200,000 years, humans were simply not ready. The conditions weren't right. The climate, the ecology, the gradual accumulation of cultural knowledge, it all had to align before the spark could catch. And then it caught, and here we are. Answer 2. The software ran before, more than once, and something wiped it. This documentary is about answer 2. Not because we can prove it, not yet, not completely, but because the evidence, when you look at it honestly, is deeply unsettling, and because the question of whether we are the first or the latest version of human civilization may be the most important question our species has ever asked. Because if we've been reset before, we can be reset again. And if we don't know what reset us, if we have forgotten the warning, lost the lesson, buried the memory under 12,000 years of new beginnings, then we are stumbling toward the edge of the same cliff. Blind, convinced it isn't there. So, let's look at what's actually in the dark. Here is a fact that should stop you cold. There are over 500 independent flood myths recorded across human cultures. 500! On every continent, in every linguistic family, among peoples who had no contact with one another for tens of thousands of years. And they don't just describe floods, they describe the same flood. The details shift, the hero's name changes, the deity who sends the water changes, the number of survivors changes, but the skeleton is identical. There was a world before this one. It was destroyed by water. A few people survived. The world began again. 500 cultures across every ocean, every mountain range, every desert and jungle, all remembering the same catastrophe. Now ask yourself, what is the more reasonable explanation? Option 1. This is coincidence. Human beings are psychologically drawn to flood stories because rivers overflow and coasts flood, and water is terrifying. And so every culture independently invented a similar myth to explain that shared fear. The resemblances are superficial. The similarities are the product of convergent imagination, not shared memory. Option 2. They all remember something that actually happened. Let's look at the record carefully, because the conventional dismissal, local floods became exaggerated myths, starts to collapse the moment you examine what these stories actually say. The Sumerian flood narrative is the oldest written version we have, predating the biblical account by at least 1,000 years. In the Eridu Genesis, a king named Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, is warned by the god Enki that the divine assembly has decided to destroy humanity with a flood. He builds a boat. He survives. The waters recede. He offers sacrifices. The gods weep. The Babylonian Atrahasis epic goes further. It describes the reason for the flood. Humanity had become too numerous, too noisy, too disruptive to the divine order. The flood was a population correction, and crucially, it describes previous attempts to reduce humanity, plagues, droughts, famines, before the final decision to use water. Multiple resets before the one we remember. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the greatest literary work of the ancient world, contains the story of Utnapishtim, a man who survived the deluge and was granted immortality by the gods. When Gilgamesh meets him and asks how he achieved eternal life, Utnapishtim tells him about the flood, an event that the gods themselves wept over, that even the divine beings found overwhelming, a catastrophe so complete that it erased the world that existed before. This is not a story about a local river overflow. This is a story about the end of a world. Move east. The Hindu Matsya Purana describes Manu, the first man, the progenitor of humanity, being warned by a fish, an avatar of Vishnu, that a great flood is coming. Manu builds a boat. He is towed through the rising waters by the fish to the peaks of the northern mountains. When the waters recede, he alone repopulates the earth. The detail that matters: Manu is described as the originator of human civilization. He brings knowledge of agriculture, law, medicine, astronomy. He teaches the survivors how to live. He is not simply a man who survived a flood. He is the beginning of the current human project. Which raises an obvious question: what was the project before him? In the Mahabharata, one of the oldest and longest epic poems in existence, there are references to previous ages, previous manvantaras, cycles of human existence, each presided over by a different Manu. The current age is not the first, it is the latest in a series. The previous ages were destroyed. Move to the Americas. The Hopi people of the American Southwest preserve one of the most detailed multi-reset cosmologies in the world. They don't describe one flood. They describe 4 worlds, each preceding this one, each destroyed when humanity fell out of balance with creation. The first world ended in fire. The second world ended in ice. The third world ended in flood. The fourth world, our world, has been given to us as a final chance. The Maya, whose astronomical precision we will return to later, recorded in the Popol Vuh that the gods created humanity multiple times before achieving a version they were satisfied with. Each failed creation was destroyed. One was washed away by a flood that fell from the sky. The survivors became animals, scattered and diminished. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia carry oral traditions that researchers now estimate are at least 10,000 years old. Some believe they reach back 65,000 years, making them the oldest continuous oral tradition on Earth. Among those traditions are specific, detailed accounts of a time when the sea was much lower, when the coastal lands extended far beyond their current boundaries, when people lived on ground that is now beneath the ocean. They describe watching the sea rise, decade by decade, generation by generation, swallowing the world they knew. This is not metaphor. Australian coastal geologists have confirmed that sea levels around the continent rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age. The coastline that Aboriginal peoples describe, now submerged, existed exactly when and where the stories say it did. They weren't telling myths. They were preserving history. And this is the pivot point, the moment where the conventional explanation starts to give way. Because what happened at the end of the last ice age was genuinely catastrophic in scale. The glaciers that had covered vast portions of the northern hemisphere, ice sheets miles thick, containing unimaginable volumes of frozen water, began to melt. And as they melted, the oceans rose, not gradually, not slowly enough to be ignored, in pulses, in surges, in events that geologists call meltwater pulses. The sea level jumped. Meltwater pulse 1A, approximately 14,000 years ago, raised global sea levels by roughly 50 feet in a geological instant, perhaps over just a few centuries. To put that in terms, a coastal civilization would understand. Your harbors flood. Your ports go underwater. Your fishing grounds, your trade routes, your ceremonial sites, gone. The farmland nearest the shore, the most productive land, the land your civilization depends on, swallowed. And the sea keeps coming. This is not a local disaster. This is a global one. Now consider where humans have always preferred to live. Near water, near coasts, near the mouths of rivers, the edges of lakes, the margins of the sea, the most productive ecosystems, the most accessible trade routes, the most fertile soil, all of it concentrated in the zones that the rising ocean would claim first. If there were advanced settlements along those ancient coastlines, if there were cities, harbors, monuments, libraries, they are now beneath hundreds of feet of water. They have been beneath hundreds of feet of water for 12,000 years. No archaeologist has ever looked for them because we have assumed there was nothing to find. But 3 million square miles of land went underwater at the end of the last ice age. 3 million square miles, an area roughly equal to the continental United States, submerged, unreachable, unexplored. And we wonder why we can't find the civilization. Here is what the myths are telling us, stripped of the supernatural framing. There was a world before this one. It existed near the coasts, as all civilizations do. The waters rose and took it. A few people survived, moving inland, carrying what they could. They told their children what had been lost, and their children told their children. And the story traveled across 10,000 years, degrading at the edges, accumulating mythology, but preserving the core. The world drowned. We started over, not once, maybe multiple times, because the ice ages didn't just happen once. The Earth has cycled through glacial and interglacial periods repeatedly over the last 2 million years. Each time the ice retreated, the seas rose. Each time the ice advanced, the seas fell, exposing new land. Each cycle lasted tens of thousands of years. If humanity is truly 200,000 years old, we have lived through at least 2 or 3 complete glacial cycles, each one a potential reset, each one erasing the coastal civilizations of the previous warm period, replacing them with new coastal civilizations that will be erased in their turn. The flood myths aren't remembering one event. They might be remembering all of them, compressed and overlaid into a single archetypal story. The story of every time the world drowned, every time humanity started over, every time someone built a boat and survived. 500 witnesses, 500 separate cultures, all telling the same story. When 500 eyewitnesses describe the same event, we don't call it mythology, we call it testimony. There is a layer in the geological record. It exists beneath your feet right now, or rather, beneath a few feet of subsequent soil, spread across North America, Western Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. It's thin, just a centimeter or two in most places, but what's inside it is extraordinary. Iridium, a rare metallic element that is extraordinarily uncommon in the Earth's crust, but abundant in asteroids and comets. Nanodiamonds, microscopic carbon structures that only form under conditions of extreme heat and pressure, the kind generated by a high-velocity cosmic impact. Magnetic spherules, tiny spherical beads of iron and silica that form when rock is suddenly melted and flung into the air, cooling as they fall back to Earth. Platinum, titanium, shocked quartz, melted glass, and charcoal. Vast, continent-spanning layers of charcoal, the chemical signature of wildfires on a scale that dwarfs anything in recorded history. This layer exists at a very specific moment in time, approximately 12,800 years ago. The scientific community calls the event that created this layer the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And if the hypothesis is correct, and the evidence for it has been growing steadily, documented in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed at over 50 sites around the world, then what happened 12,800 years ago was one of the most catastrophic events in the last 100,000 years of Earth history. Something hit us, or something exploded above us. Most likely, given the distribution of the impact markers and the absence of a single massive crater. It was a fragmenting comet or asteroid, a cluster of cosmic debris that entered the atmosphere and detonated in multiple airbursts across a wide swath of the northern hemisphere. What followed was the end of a world. The airbursts triggered immediate, massive wildfires. The evidence shows that a large fraction of the forests of North America burned simultaneously. The ash and soot thrown into the upper atmosphere blocked the sun. Without sunlight, temperatures plummeted. The climate, which had been gradually warming after the peak of the last glaciation, reversed overnight. Within what geologists estimate was a period of months to a few years, the northern hemisphere plunged back into near glacial conditions. This event has a name: the Younger Dryas, a period of cold, dry, harsh climate that lasted for approximately 1,300 years, beginning at 12,800 years ago and ending abruptly around 11,500 years ago. And it marks, with disturbing precision, one of the most dramatic transitions in human prehistory. Before the Younger Dryas, the megafauna were still alive. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, American horses, camels, giant beavers, dozens of large mammal species that had survived millions of years of evolution and previous climate fluctuations, and a nascent human culture, the Clovis people of North America, were spreading across the continent. Among the most successful hunter-gatherer societies the Americas had ever seen. After the Younger Dryas, virtually all of those megafauna species were gone, extinct, and the Clovis culture had vanished from the archaeological record, replaced by successor cultures that appear to have been rebuilding from a much lower baseline. Something happened, something enormous, something that killed the large animals, disrupted the climate for over a millennium, and, if there were advanced human settlements in the affected regions, would have erased them as completely as if they had never existed. The impact markers in the sediment record don't lie. The chemistry is real. The nanodiamonds are real. The charcoal layers spanning entire continents are real. What is still debated is the mechanism, exactly what hit, exactly where, exactly how many fragments were involved. But the event itself, the catastrophic disruption of the biosphere at 12,800 years ago, is not in serious scientific doubt. Now consider what the myths say. The Hopi describe a first world destroyed by fire. Not floods, fire, flames that came from above and consumed everything. The Greek myth of Phaethon, the young man who borrowed the chariot of the sun and lost control, scorching the earth, burning the forests, turning fertile land to desert, reads, to anyone who knows the Younger Dryas, like an eyewitness account struggling to describe a cosmic impact using the only framework available to a pre-scientific culture. The Zoroastrian texts of ancient Persia describe a cosmic catastrophe in which fire fell from the sky and the world as it existed was ended. The survivors were those who took shelter in caves, in underground places, until the fires passed. The Nordic myths describe a period called Fimbulwinter, 3 consecutive years of brutal cold, no summer, no respite, that precedes the great destruction called Ragnarok. 3 years of cold. The Younger Dryas lasted 1,300 years, but if the initial impact event caused a rapid cooling that survivors experienced as a prolonged winter, unlike anything they had ever known, the mythological compression of 1,300 years into 3 winters becomes understandable. You don't remember 1,300 years. You remember the winter that never ended, passed down through generations as the worst thing that ever happened, distilled to the mythological essence of prolonged, killing cold. And then there's the question of what didn't survive. The Clovis culture, the most widespread, most successful human culture in North America at the time of the Younger Dryas, disappears from the archaeological record at exactly the moment the impact markers appear. Not gradually, not over centuries. The Clovis signature simply stops. What replaced it? Smaller, less sophisticated, more scattered cultures. Cultures that look, in the archaeological record, like people rebuilding from a very low baseline. Learning again, starting over. Does this sound familiar? Here is the darker possibility that the impact hypothesis opens. If there were human settlements in North America, Europe, and the Middle East in the period just before 12,800 years ago, and there were, we know that, the Clovis culture was flourishing, and those settlements were coastal, built near the rivers and shores that were typical of every human civilization before and since, then the Younger Dryas impact would have done 2 things simultaneously. It would have triggered the catastrophic wildfires that the charcoal record shows, and it would have destabilized the ice sheets, contributing to the meltwater pulses that raised the sea level and submerged the coasts. Fire from above, flood from below, at the same time. One event, a fragmenting comet, producing both of the great mythological resets simultaneously. The fire myths and the flood myths, the 2 most universal catastrophe narratives in human culture, both pointing to the same moment in time, 12,800 years ago. If that's what happened, then the myths are not exaggerations. They are compressed, mythologized, but fundamentally accurate memories of a cosmic catastrophe that ended the previous version of human civilization and forced our species to start over. And here is the truly unsettling part. It has happened before. The geological record shows multiple impact events throughout Earth history. The cosmic neighborhood we live in is not as safe as we like to assume. The asteroid belt is vast. Comets travel on long, elliptical orbits that bring them through the inner solar system on timescales of thousands to tens of thousands of years. The question is not whether it has happened. The question is, are we paying attention? On the first day of September, 1859, a British astronomer named Richard Carrington was doing what he did every clear morning, drawing sunspots through his solar telescope, careful and methodical, making his tidy notations in his scientific journal. And then the sun did something he had never seen before. A brilliant white light erupted from the surface of the solar disk, so intense that Carrington could not look directly at it, even through his filtered telescope. He watched for perhaps 5 minutes, then ran to fetch a witness, because he knew no one would believe him. By the time he returned, the light was gone. What had just occurred was the largest solar flare in recorded history, or rather, the largest we have direct documentation of. The flare launched a massive coronal mass ejection, a billion-ton cloud of charged particles accelerating through space at several million miles per hour, directly toward Earth. It arrived 18 hours later. What happened next was unlike anything in recorded history. The auroras, the northern and southern lights, which normally appear only at high latitudes near the poles, blazed as far south as the Caribbean. In the Rocky Mountains, gold miners woke in the middle of the night, convinced it was dawn. Telegraph systems across North America and Europe, the most sophisticated communications technology of the era, began to spark and catch fire. Operators received electric shocks through their equipment. Papers and wooden telegraph stations ignited. And remarkably, some telegraph systems continued to operate for hours after being disconnected from their power sources, running entirely on the current induced by the storm. That was 1859. We called it the Carrington event, and it happened at a time when the most complex electrical technology on Earth was the telegraph. Now ask yourself what the same event would do today. Modern civilization runs on electricity, not in the peripheral, optional way that 1859 civilization ran on the telegraph, in an absolute, foundational, no substitutes way. The power grid, the internet, satellite communications, GPS navigation, banking systems, hospital life support, water treatment plants, food refrigeration, fuel pumps, all of it operates on electrical infrastructure, and all of it is vulnerable to a sufficiently powerful geomagnetic storm. The United States Federal Emergency Management Agency has modeled the consequences of a Carrington-scale event hitting today. The estimates are sobering. Transformers across large sections of the power grid, the massive custom-built transformers that take months to manufacture and years to install, would be destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. The manufacturing capacity to replace them does not exist. Restoration of power to the affected regions would take not days or weeks, but months or years. In the meantime, no refrigeration, so food spoils. No water pumps, so cities lose pressure within days. No fuel pumps, so transportation stops. No internet, no banking, no communication. No hospitals running at capacity. No supply chains delivering food to the cities that can no longer grow their own. In 2012, a coronal mass ejection of Carrington-class magnitude missed the Earth by 9 days. 9 days. We were 9 days from a potential civilizational catastrophe. And most people on Earth never knew. But here's what makes this chapter more than a warning about the present. The ice core record, cylinders of ancient ice drilled from the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, each layer representing a year of atmospheric history going back hundreds of thousands of years, contains the chemical signatures of solar events. And what it shows is deeply unsettling. There are signatures in the ice from solar events that dwarf the Carrington event. Not by a small margin, by orders of magnitude. Proton bombardment events, moments when the sun released bursts of radiation so intense that they are preserved as anomalies in the radiocarbon and beryllium-10 records, appear multiple times in the deep ice. Events in 774 AD and 993 AD are already documented. Their signatures are 10 to 20 times stronger than anything in modern recorded history. And those are the events we can see in the record. What about the ones that happened before the ice record begins to thin and degrade? What about a Carrington event times 100, striking a civilization that, unlike us, had no warning systems at all? There would be no satellites to detect the incoming storm, no power grids to shut down preemptively, no communications network to spread the warning. Just the sun, suddenly, without precedent, turning hostile. The sky would burn. Not metaphorically. The auroras at the equator would be visible in daylight. People who had no concept of electromagnetic radiation would see the heavens themselves aflame. And if the civilization was dependent on any form of electrical or electromagnetic technology, which, if we are entertaining the possibility of advanced prehistory, it might have been, the effect would be total and instantaneous, not a slow collapse, not a war or a famine. A single event, hours long, that would turn every electronic system on Earth into smoldering wreckage. How would the survivors describe it? In the language of every culture that has ever told stories about what the sky can do to the world, the answer is obvious. The sun attacked. The sky burned. The gods fought with weapons of light. The world ended in fire. Cultures across the ancient world describe catastrophes that came specifically from the sky, specifically involving light and heat, specifically associated with the end of an age. Egyptian texts describe periods when the sun behaved wrongly, when Ra himself was enraged, when the disk of the sun became a weapon rather than a life-giver. Vedic texts describe celestial weapons that blinded entire armies, that produced heat like 10,000 suns that were deployed from above. We read these as mythology, as metaphor, as the poetic exaggeration of primitive people who didn't understand the physics of what they were witnessing. But what if they understood it exactly? What if they simply didn't have our vocabulary? What if the gods fought with weapons of light is the best available description in the cultural language of the time of a solar electromagnetic event that rewrote the physics of their world. The sun is not our friend. It is a thermonuclear reactor 93 million miles away, and it operates on its own schedule, which does not account for human civilization. It has reset us before, and the clock on its next significant outburst is not something we can predict or control or stop. On July 16, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was detonated. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, stood watching the light that should not have existed, the light that made the desert itself briefly brighter than the sun, and in the silence after the shockwave passed, he thought of a line from the Bhagavad Gita, a line from a Sanskrit text composed at least 2,000 years before the invention of nuclear physics. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He didn't reach for a metaphor from Western literature. He reached for an ancient Indian text, because in that moment it fit better than anything else ever written. Why? The Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, one of the two great Sanskrit epics of ancient India. And the Mahabharata, which may contain textual layers going back 3,000 years or more, contains descriptions of warfare that should be impossible. Not impossible in the way that mythological exaggeration is impossible. Impossible in the way that precise technical detail is impossible when the technology described didn't exist. The Mahabharata describes weapons called astras, divine weapons of immense destructive power, invoked through specific mantras and released upon enemies. Some of these weapons are conventional by the standards of the era: arrows, spears, fire. But others are not. The Brahmastra, for example, is described in the text as producing a weapon so powerful it could destroy the earth and the heavens. When released, it produces a blinding flash of light, followed by a column of smoke and fire rising to the sky, followed by explosive devastation in all directions. Those struck by it are described as having their hair fall out, their skin blisters. They survive the initial blast, but die weeks or months later, consumed by mysterious illness. Their bodies cannot be cremated normally. The rivers in the affected area become poisoned. Read that list of symptoms without the mythological framing, and you are reading a clinical description of acute radiation syndrome. Hair loss, skin blistering, delayed death, environmental contamination. These are not the symptoms of being hit by a spear or a flaming arrow. These are the symptoms of exposure to ionizing radiation. The text also describes the aftermath of the Brahmastra's use in terms that match, with unsettling precision, the environmental effects of nuclear detonation. The ground becomes barren. Crops fail for years. The water is undrinkable. The land itself becomes hostile to life. This is not the description of a sword fight. Now consider the archaeological evidence. At Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization and one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world, excavators in the 1920s discovered something that has never been adequately explained. In the upper levels of the city, the most recent occupation layers, they found the skeletons of people who died suddenly, in the streets, in positions that suggest they were going about their daily lives when something killed them instantly. And scattered around these remains, they found areas of vitrified stone. Vitrification, the process by which rock or soil is melted into a glass-like substance, requires temperatures in excess of 1,500 degrees Celsius. Normal fires, even extremely hot fires, don't vitrify stone. The temperatures required are those of an industrial furnace or a nuclear explosion. The conventional explanation is that the vitrification at Mohenjo-Daro resulted from pottery kilns or industrial fires. And this is possible. It's worth saying clearly that there is no consensus among archaeologists that ancient nuclear warfare destroyed Mohenjo-Daro. But the vitrification is real. The sudden deaths in the streets are real. And the conventional explanations have not fully accounted for the scale and distribution of what was found. In the Scottish Highlands, there are a series of ancient hill forts whose stone walls have been vitrified, melted and fused into a glassy mass, in a way that requires temperatures far beyond anything a wood fire could produce, even a very large one. These are called vitrified forts, and archaeologists have spent decades debating how they were built, because the vitrification process seems to require a heat source we cannot identify. In the Sahara Desert, across Libya and Egypt, there are vast fields of a material called Libyan desert glass, millions of tons of a pale yellow silica glass, scattered across thousands of square kilometers of desert. The glass formed approximately 29 million years ago, and the most widely accepted current theory is that it was created by a cometary or asteroidal airburst, an explosion in the atmosphere that instantly melted the desert surface. The relevance: the glass created by the first nuclear test at Trinity Site in New Mexico, trinitite, is chemically and structurally similar to Libyan desert glass. Different age, different origin, but the same process: extreme heat, extreme speed, sand fusing into glass. The biblical account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah deserves re-examination here, not as theology, but as description: a rain of fire and brimstone from the sky. Two cities obliterated so completely that they could not be rebuilt. The land rendered permanently uninhabitable. The smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Lot's wife, looking back at the destruction, and turned into a pillar of salt, or burned, flash crystallized, instantly destroyed by a wave of energy. Archaeologists have proposed Tal el-Hammam in Jordan as a candidate for one of the destroyed cities. In 2021, a peer-reviewed study in the journal Nature published findings from the site. Evidence of a cosmic airburst approximately 3,600 years ago that produced temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, instantly vaporizing or destroying everything in its path, melting pottery, turning mud brick into glass, killing everyone in the city in seconds. Not a nuclear weapon, a cosmic airburst, but the result, to anyone witnessing it, would have been indistinguishable. Fire from the sky, the complete destruction of cities. Ground rendered uninhabitable for generations. Survivors describing what they saw in the only language available to them. Now push the timeline back further. Not 3,000 years, not 12,000 years. Further, if our species has existed for 200,000 years, and if the cognitive capacity for complex technology has been present throughout, if, in other words, There have been previous civilizations that rose to levels of technological sophistication comparable to or exceeding our own. Then the question of whether they developed and potentially used weapons of mass destruction is not fantasy. It is simply the question of whether they made the same mistakes we have nearly made. We built nuclear weapons in 1945. We built enough of them by 1960 to end human civilization several times over. We came within minutes of using them, more than once. In the decades that followed, the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the Soviet nuclear false alarm of 1983, when a single lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov chose not to report an apparent missile launch that his systems had detected, a detection that turned out to be an error, and in doing so may have saved the world. One person, one decision, between the world as it is and the end of everything. If a previous civilization made the wrong decision, if their Petrov chose differently, what would remain? The glass in the desert, the vitrified stone walls, the myths of weapons that shine like 1,000 suns. And in the texts of their descendants, trying to understand what the ancestors had done, the warnings would be there. The Astras, the Brahmastra, the divine weapons so terrible that using them was forbidden, because to use them was to risk the destruction of everything. Not mythology, not metaphor, memory. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd was walking through the hills of southeastern Turkey near a town called Şanlıurfa when his foot struck something that didn't belong. Under the thin soil, he found stone. Not ordinary stone, carved stone, shaped stone, stone that had been worked by human hands with obvious deliberate intention. He reported his find. Archaeologists came, and what they found over the following years of excavation has not stopped being astonishing. Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill in Turkish, is a complex of stone enclosures built approximately 12,000 years ago. The site consists of circular arrangements of T-shaped limestone pillars, some of them standing 6 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons, covered with carved reliefs of animals, foxes, gazelles, snakes, vultures, scorpions, wild boars, lions, ducks depicted with artistic skill and anatomical accuracy that belongs to a sophisticated artistic tradition, not the first tentative marks of a people barely learning to carve. 12,000 years ago, this is the part that stops every archaeologist who encounters it cold. 12,000 years ago, according to every model of human prehistory that existed before Göbekli Tepe was excavated, human beings were small band hunter-gatherers. No permanent settlements, no agriculture, no writing, no complex social organization, no surplus food production to support a specialized labor class, no nothing. And yet, Göbekli Tepe. To build Göbekli Tepe, someone had to quarry 20-ton limestone pillars from bedrock, transport them up a hill, and erect them precisely in circular configurations. Someone had to organize hundreds of workers who had to be fed, housed, and coordinated over what must have been a period of decades. Someone had to design the complex, plan the enclosures, determine the astronomical alignments that researchers have identified in the site's layout. Someone had to train the craftspeople who produced the carved reliefs. Someone had to decide that it was worth doing. None of this is consistent with small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. All of it requires the kind of social organization, hierarchy, surplus, specialization, coordination over long distances and time that we associate with settled, complex civilization. And then, after Göbekli Tepe was built, it was deliberately buried. Not destroyed. Buried. Someone filled in the enclosures with rubble and soil, covering the pillars, entombing the site, hiding it from the world as if someone wanted it to last until a specific time. Why? Who buries a cathedral? Unless you are preserving it, unless you understand that something is coming, a catastrophe, a long dark, and you want what you have built to survive it, sealed against time, waiting for the people who will come after. The same impossibility, at different scales and different times, appears across the ancient world. Baalbek, in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, is home to what the Romans called Heliopolis, the city of the sun. The Roman temple complex there is impressive. Massive columns, intricate carvings, one of the great architectural achievements of the ancient world. But the Romans built on top of something older. Much older. The foundation platform on which the Roman temples rest includes stones of a scale that challenges engineering credibility. 3 of them, called the Trilithon, are limestone blocks each weighing approximately 800 tons. They are placed side by side in a course roughly 8 meters above ground level, fitted together so precisely that a piece of paper cannot be slid between them. The Romans did not place these stones. The historical record makes this clear. The Romans built on top of an existing structure, and their own engineers, masters of the ancient world's most sophisticated construction methods, appear to have made no attempt to explain how the foundation was built or to replicate the technique. 800 tons, the largest mobile cranes in the world today. The Liebherr LTM 112-00-9.1 has a maximum lift capacity of approximately 1,200 tons, but only under highly specific conditions, with extensive infrastructure, carefully engineered lifting points, and months of planning. Moving an 800-ton stone across terrain and placing it with millimeter precision would be a significant challenge for 21st century engineering. Who placed those stones? How? With what equipment? In what period? For what purpose? No one knows. And the lack of any answer in the conventional historical record is not a small gap. It is a canyon. At Sacsayhuaman, above the ancient Inca capital of Cusco in Peru, the walls of a massive fortress complex are built from polygonal limestone and andesite blocks, some weighing over 200 tons. Cut and fitted together in irregular shapes that interlock with 3-dimensional precision. No 2 blocks are the same. Every joint is unique, and yet every joint fits perfectly. No mortar, no gap, a dry stone construction of staggering complexity. The Inca themselves, when asked by Spanish chroniclers who had built Sacsayhuaman, said it was built by the gods, or by a race of giants who lived before them. They did not claim credit. The people who were widely acknowledged as master builders of the ancient Americas, who constructed massive terraced agricultural systems, elaborate road networks, and impressive stone cities, looked at Sacsayhuaman and said, "That is not our work." Why would they deny building it? If they built it, why not take credit? Unless they genuinely didn't build it. Unless they inherited it from someone who came before, someone they had no living memory of, someone who existed in the time before the reset. The polygonal masonry tradition, the precise fitting of irregular stone blocks in exactly this manner, appears at multiple sites across South America, some attributed to pre-Inca cultures, some to cultures that predate any civilization we have formal records of. Identical technique, distributed across vast distances, as if the same builder or the same school of builders operated across the continent and then vanished. The same precision stonework appears in Egypt in the granite boxes of the Serapeum at Saqqara, massive granite containers, each carved from a single block of stone, their interior surfaces flat to within thousandths of an inch. Their corners at exact right angles that modern machinists describe as requiring industrial precision to achieve. These boxes were supposedly created with copper chisels and stone hammers. Christopher Dunn, a machining engineer who has spent decades studying Egyptian stonework, with the eye of a professional craftsman rather than an archaeologist, documented evidence of what appear to be machine tool processes in the granite, saw cuts too uniform for handwork, drill holes showing spiral patterns consistent with mechanical drilling at high speed, polished surfaces with tolerances his instruments could not distinguish from modern machine-ground surfaces. He is not an archaeologist. Archaeologists have largely dismissed his work. But Dunn brings something that most archaeologists lack: professional expertise in what machine tools actually do and what they leave behind. And his conclusion that the stonework of ancient Egypt shows evidence of tool technology that we do not attribute to the ancient Egyptians is based on measurement, not ideology. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, the situation is even stranger. The site consists of precisely cut blocks of red sandstone and andesite, some weighing hundreds of tons, cut with what appear to be machined surfaces. Flat planes, right angles, H-shaped slots, drill holes that look, to any modern machinist, like the work of power tools. The Tiwanaku culture, to which the site is attributed, left no evidence of the tools that could have produced this stonework. The tools we know they had: stone, bone, copper, cannot account for what we see. The stones are not arranged in any reconstructible order. They appear to have been scattered, violently scattered, as if by an explosion or a catastrophic event, across the landscape. The site looks like a construction project that was interrupted suddenly before it was completed, or a completed structure that was destroyed. What destroyed it? When? By whom? The questions compound, and at every site, in every culture, across every continent, the answer from the people who inherited these structures is the same. We didn't build this. The people before us did. The gods did. The giants did. Someone did. And they knew things we don't. The ocean is where the answers are buried. We know this, we suspect this, and we have done almost nothing about it. Consider the arithmetic of the Ice Age. At the peak of the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, so much of the Earth's water was locked in continental ice sheets that global sea levels were roughly 400 feet. More than 120 meters, lower than they are today. The coastlines of every continent were dramatically different. The Persian Gulf was dry land. The South China Sea was a continent-scale landmass. The English Channel did not exist. The Bering Strait between Asia and North America was a broad, inhabitable plain. As the ice melted over the following 10,000 years, the sea rose. Not smoothly, in pulses, in surges, in catastrophic meltwater events. The coastlines retreated, the lands drowned, the maps were rewritten. 3 million square miles of land went underwater. An area roughly the size of the continental United States, now beneath the ocean, gone from every map, inaccessible to every archaeologist, unexplored by every expedition. And humans, as they have always done, lived near the coasts, near the water. The most productive coastal zones, the places where fresh water meets salt water, where fish are abundant and trade is easy, and the land is flat and fertile. These are the places where every civilization has always concentrated itself. These are exactly the places that are now 400 feet underwater. Off the coast of Japan, near the small island of Yonaguni, in 1986, a diver named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the shallow waters for hammerhead sharks when he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Stone terraces, wide, flat platforms separated by vertical faces, right angles, steps, structures that had no business existing on the seafloor. The Yonaguni Monument, as it has come to be called, consists of a series of stone platforms and what appear to be structural features. Carved steps, channels, pillars, covering an area approximately 250 meters long and 25 meters high. It sits at a depth that was above water during the last ice age. If it is man-made, it was built at least 10,000 years ago, when the area was dry land. The debate among researchers has been fierce. Some argue the structures are entirely natural, that the geometry results from natural fracturing of the sandstone along parallel and perpendicular planes, a process that can, under the right geological conditions, produce regular forms. Others, including the diver Aratake and a number of Japanese geologists who have dived the site, argue that the regularity of the features, the right angles, the channels, the steps, are inconsistent with natural formation. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus who studied the site for years, concluded that it is artificial, that it was built by human hands when the sea level was lower. His evidence includes what appear to be carving marks, holes bored into the rock, and features that he argues cannot be explained by natural processes. The argument continues. But the monument exists. Whether natural or artificial, it sits at a depth that was habitable land 10,000 years ago. And if it is artificial, its implications are seismic. Because Yonaguni is not alone. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Khambat, marine archaeologists using side-scan sonar in 2001 discovered a series of structures on the seafloor, geometric formations, what appeared to be city blocks, walls, and roads, spread across a large area of the seabed. The find was controversial immediately, partly because of the national and cultural sensitivities involved. India's ancient texts describe a sunken civilization called Dwarka, the mythical city of Krishna, and partly because the structures, if confirmed as man-made, would predate the accepted timeline of Indian civilization by thousands of years. Artifacts were recovered from the site, including wooden pieces dated by carbon-14 analysis to approximately 9,000 years old. 9,000 years, older than Mesopotamia, older than Egypt, in a location that was above water exactly 9,000 years ago. The Indian government announced the discovery as a major archaeological find. The international archaeological community greeted it with extreme skepticism, arguing that the sonar images were ambiguous and the recovered artifacts could have been deposited by currents from elsewhere. Full excavation has been limited by the difficult conditions of the site. The structures remain, the wood remains, the questions remain. Similar reports come from the coasts of Cuba, where divers reported what appeared to be a complex of stone structures at considerable depth in 2001. From the Mediterranean, where anomalous formations have been reported in multiple locations. From the North Sea, where archaeologists have found evidence of a large landmass, now called Doggerland, that was inhabited by human communities before being swallowed by the sea approximately 8,000 years ago. Doggerland is particularly significant because we have actual archaeological evidence of it: tools, weapons, bones, dredged up by fishing nets and investigated systematically. It was a real place, inhabited by real people, now 300 feet underwater. Its communities are gone. Their settlements are gone. If they built anything more substantial than temporary camps, if, in the warmer periods before the final submergence, they developed more complex structures, those are gone too, buried under millennia of sediment. We have mapped approximately 20% of the ocean floor in meaningful detail. 80% of the seafloor remains, functionally, terra incognita. We have better maps of the surface of Mars, of the Moon, of Venus, than we do of our own planet's seafloor. The reason is not technical. We have the technology to map it. The reason is priority. We have not prioritized looking for things we assume aren't there. What if we looked? What if we directed the same resources toward underwater archaeology that we direct toward Mars exploration? Not to diminish Mars exploration, which is vital and profound, but as a parallel investment. What if we sent remotely operated vehicles to systematically survey the continental shelves, the zones that were above water 12,000 years ago, the zones where coastal civilizations would have been built? The answer is that we don't know what we would find, but we know that the probability of finding something significant is not zero. The probability of finding something significant is, in fact, quite high, because that's where the people were. And if we find the cities, if the sonar returns the geometric signatures of planned construction, of walls and roads and foundations, preserved under centuries of silt at the edge of the continental shelf, then every question this documentary has raised becomes not speculation, but established history. The civilization was real. The reset was real. The world that came before us was real, and it is waiting, patient and silent, on the floor of the sea. In 1900, a sponge diver working off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, near a shipwreck that had lain on the seabed for more than 2,000 years, brought up a corroded lump of bronze and wood. It was set aside. It was not particularly interesting. Shipwrecks contained all kinds of debris. Then, 2 years later, Someone dropped it, and it split open. And inside, the researchers saw something that should not have existed. Gears, dozens of them, precisely cut, meshing with each other, some no larger than a thumbnail, all machined to tolerances that implied systematic precision manufacturing. The mechanism was complex, layered, nested, calibrated, clearly designed to perform a specific function that the researchers in 1902 could not immediately determine. It took another century of analysis, including X-ray CT scanning of the corroded remains in the 1970s and advanced imaging techniques in the 2000s, to fully understand what the device was. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be called, is an analog astronomical computer. It was designed to track and predict the positions of the sun and moon, to predict solar and lunar eclipses, to calculate the dates of the ancient Olympic Games, and to display the motions of the known planets. It used a sophisticated system of differential gears, epicyclic gearing, and pin and slot mechanisms that allow it to perform calculations of remarkable complexity and accuracy. It dates to approximately 100 BCE, give or take a few decades. And here is the problem. The next device of comparable mechanical complexity to appear in the historical record, the next machine that shows evidence of differential gearing, of precision machined interlocking mechanisms, of anything approaching the engineering sophistication of the Antikythera mechanism, appears in Europe approximately 1400 years later. In the Renaissance, 1400 years, the Antikythera mechanism appeared in the 1st century BCE, and nothing remotely comparable appeared again until the 15th century CE, a gap of 14 centuries in the historical record of mechanical engineering, yawning on either side of this single recovered artifact. What does this tell us? It tells us that the knowledge existed. In 100 BCE, someone knew how to design and build a differential gear analog computer of extraordinary precision. And then that knowledge disappeared. Not gradually, not replaced by something better, just gone, lost in the chaos of the late Roman period, in the destruction of libraries, in the disruption of the trade networks that connected the craftspeople who carried the knowledge. The Antikythera mechanism is, in a very real sense, a fossil. It is a remnant of a technological tradition that was otherwise completely destroyed. If the ship carrying it had not sunk in exactly the right location, at exactly the right depth, in exactly the right sediment conditions to preserve the mechanism for 2,000 years, we would never know that this level of mechanical sophistication existed in the ancient world. How many other fossils are there, still on the seafloor, still buried, still waiting? The Piri Reis map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis in 1513, presents a different kind of impossible artifact. The map shows the Atlantic Ocean, the coasts of Europe and Africa, the coast of South America, and along the bottom, what appears to be a continuous southern landmass featuring geographical details that were not supposed to exist in 1513. Details that look, with unsettling precision, like the coastline of Antarctica. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. It was not mapped in any detail until the 20th century, and certain features of the coastline, bays, inlets, mountain ranges, were not confirmed until geophysical surveys conducted beneath the ice sheet in the 1950s and afterward revealed the shape of the subglacial coastline, the actual land surface hidden under miles of ice. The Piri Reis map appears to show that subglacial coastline, not the current coastline covered in ice, the ice-free coastline that existed before the Antarctic ice sheet formed, which places the source map at least 6,000 years ago, and possibly much older. Piri Reis himself noted in annotations on the map that he compiled it from 20 older source maps, some dating to the era of Alexander the Great and earlier. He did not claim to have conducted the Southern Survey himself. He was working from older sources that have since vanished. Where did those source maps come from? Who sailed to Antarctica and mapped its ice-free coastline? By what technology? Using what navigational methods? The Piri Reis map is not a forgery. It has been examined by multiple independent cartographic experts, including cartographers employed by the United States Navy and the Library of Congress. It is genuine. It dates to 1513, and it contains information that should not have been available in 1513. The Baghdad Battery, 3 clay vessels found near Baghdad in 1936, dating to the Parthian period approximately 2,000 years ago, is another artifact that refuses to sit quietly in the conventional timeline. Each vessel contains a copper cylinder and an iron rod sealed with asphalt in a configuration that, when filled with an acidic solution such as vinegar, generates a small electrical current. Multiple reproductions have been built and tested. They work. Was this a battery? Was it used to generate electricity? For what purpose? Electroplating? Pain relief through galvanic stimulation? Religious ritual involving divine lightning? No one knows. The Parthians left no explanation. The device exists, and it generates electricity, and that is supposed to be impossible in the ancient world. The Dendera lights, carved reliefs in the Hathor Temple at Dendera, Egypt, dating to the Ptolemaic period, depict what some researchers interpret as large glass bulbs with serpentine filaments inside, supported on pillars and connected by braided cables. Whether these are actually representations of light bulbs, or whether they depict lotus flowers and serpents in a conventional Egyptian symbolic vocabulary, is debated. But the resemblance to modern incandescent bulb designs, noted by engineers who have examined the carvings, is difficult to dismiss entirely. Each of these artifacts, taken alone, is a curiosity. Taken together, they form a pattern. A pattern of technological knowledge appearing in the ancient world, sometimes dramatically in advance of what is supposed to exist at the time, and then disappearing, lost, forgotten, destroyed, to re-emerge centuries or millennia later, as if being rediscovered rather than invented fresh. This is not what progress looks like. Progress is continuous. Knowledge builds on knowledge. Skills accumulate. The historical record shows innovations developing from precursors, improving over time, becoming more sophisticated generation by generation. What the out-of-place artifacts show is something different: the appearance of sophisticated technology without visible precursors, followed by its disappearance without visible successors. The profile of inheritance and loss, not of organic development. Someone built the Antikythera mechanism. They learned from people who built earlier, cruder versions, gradually refining the technique. That earlier tradition, that school of precision mechanical engineering, was real and existed for long enough to produce the Antikythera mechanism at its peak. And then the whole tradition was destroyed, and 1400 years of mechanical engineering had to start over. Somewhere in the wreckage of the ancient world, the earlier versions of the mechanism, the prototype, the drafting studies, the teaching tools, are waiting to be found. In the wreckage of libraries, in the sediment of harbors, on the floors of seas. The story of human technology is not one of continuous progress. It is one of rising and falling, of knowledge appearing and being lost, of civilizations reaching sophistication and then losing it, over and over. The out-of-place artifacts are the fingerprints of previous peaks. They are the evidence, physical and undeniable, that we have been here before. The most intimate record of what happened to our species is not in the stones. It is not in the myths. It is not in the ocean sediment or the ice cores. It is in you. Right now, in every cell of your body, there is a molecule approximately 2 meters long, coiled and compressed into a space smaller than this period at the end of this sentence. That molecule, DNA, contains a record of every significant event in your ancestral line going back millions of years. Not a verbal record, not a narrative, a genetic record written in the 4-letter chemical alphabet of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, preserving in molecular form the consequences of every catastrophe your ancestors lived through. And when scientists read that record carefully, what they find is disturbing. Humans are genetically uniform, remarkably, unusually, scientifically anomalously uniform, for a species that has supposedly existed for 200,000 years and spread across every continent on Earth. To understand why this is strange, consider a comparison. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, occupy a relatively small range in sub-Saharan Africa. Their total population is approximately 200,000 individuals, spread across a geographical area that is a fraction of the range that humans inhabit. By every measure of population dynamics, chimpanzees should be genetically less diverse than humans. They are not. Chimpanzees carry roughly 3 times the genetic diversity of Homo sapiens. Populations of chimpanzees in different parts of Africa are genetically more different from each other than any 2 human populations anywhere on Earth are from each other. This should not be possible if humans have been expanding across the globe for 200,000 years. Isolation and genetic drift, the random accumulation of genetic differences in separated populations, should have produced enormous diversity over that time span. We should be far more different from each other than we are. We are not. The scientific explanation is the population bottleneck, a catastrophic reduction in the total human population at some point in our past, so severe that it essentially reset our genetic clock, eliminating the accumulated diversity of however many millennia had preceded it, and replacing the rich genetic tapestry of a large distributed population with the compressed genetic signature of a small group of survivors. The most famous of these bottlenecks is associated with the Toba supervolcanic eruption, approximately 74,000 years ago. Toba, in what is now Sumatra, Indonesia, was the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 million years, roughly 10,000 times larger than the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption. It ejected approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. The resulting volcanic winter may have lasted between 6 and 10 years. Global temperatures may have dropped by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. The environmental devastation would have been catastrophic. Genetic analysis suggests that the total human population around this time may have dropped to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 reproductive individuals. Some estimates are even lower, as few as 1,000 breeding pairs. In a species that had been expanding and diversifying for over 100,000 years, this represents an almost incomprehensible collapse. From a population potentially numbering in the hundreds of thousands, to a remnant huddled in whatever refugia could sustain life through the catastrophe. To put this in terms that make the scale visceral, the entire population of our species at its lowest point after Toba could have fit comfortably inside a modern sports stadium. And this is the bottleneck we know about, the one that left the clearest genetic signature. In 2023, a study published in the journal Science used advanced genomic analysis to identify an earlier, more severe bottleneck, approximately 900,000 years ago, in the lineage leading to modern humans. The analysis suggested that the ancestral population of our evolutionary line was reduced to approximately 1,200 breeding individuals and remained at this critically low level for approximately 117,000 years. 117,000 years. For longer than modern humans have existed, our ancestors hung on the edge of extinction. One disease, one prolonged drought, one additional catastrophe, and there would be no modern humans, no civilization, nothing. We don't know what caused this ancient bottleneck. We may never know. The geological record at that range is difficult to read, but the genetic record is clear. Something happened, something devastating, and our ancestors were nearly erased. And then, between these documented bottlenecks, there are hints of smaller events. Localized catastrophes that left regional populations nearly extinct. Genetic signatures in specific human populations that suggest sudden, catastrophic reductions in diversity at various points in the past 10 to 30,000 years. The genomic history of humanity is not a smooth, steady expansion. It is a series of expansions punctuated by collapses, rises interrupted by falls, civilizational arcs interrupted by catastrophic compression. What does a genetic bottleneck mean for civilization? It means that whatever culture, knowledge, and technology existed in the pre-bottleneck population was represented, after the event, by only the survivors. If those survivors were from a particular region, they would carry the cultural knowledge of that region. If they were from a particular social class, the people with access to the most sheltered, most resource-rich locations, they would carry the cultural knowledge of that class. Everything else was gone. Every language not spoken by a survivor. Every craft tradition not practiced by a survivor. Every cosmological system, every technological innovation, every accumulated generation of engineering and astronomy and medicine not held in the memory of a survivor. Gone, as completely as if it had never existed. And the survivors, with their compressed genetics and their fractured cultural memory, began again, building slowly, recovering what they could, inventing what they couldn't recover, believing themselves to be the first. When you consider the multiple bottlenecks suggested by the genetic record, Toba at 74,000 years ago, the ancient event at 900,000 years, and possibly other events between, a picture emerges of a species that has been repeatedly compressed to near extinction and repeatedly rebuilt. Each compression erases most of what existed. Each rebuilding starts from the survivor's reduced knowledge base, and each rebuilt civilization, achieving whatever level of complexity it reaches before the next catastrophe, believes it is the peak of human achievement. As we do. There is something else encoded in the DNA that deserves attention. When researchers study the genetics of stress response, the way the human body's neurological and endocrine systems react to perceived threat, they find patterns that are difficult to explain by reference to the stressors of modern life. The human stress response is calibrated for catastrophe, not for traffic jams or difficult conversations or financial anxiety, for the level of threat posed by complete civilizational collapse, the systems that manage fear, the hormonal cascades that prepare the body for extreme physical response, the neurological signatures of hypervigilance and preparation for sudden, total danger. All of these are over-engineered for the actual threats faced by people in stable, modern societies, as if we were calibrated by generations of ancestors for whom sudden, total, civilizational scale catastrophe was not a remote possibility, but a lived experience. The DNA remembers, not in words, not in myth, in the architecture of fear itself, calibrated across thousands of generations of survivors who earned their survival by taking existential threat seriously. We are the children of the people who survived the resets, and they built into us, at the deepest biological level, the warning they could not pass in any other way. Be ready. It has happened before. It will happen again. Here is the question that sits at the center of everything, the question that conventional prehistory has never adequately answered. If human beings have had the same brains, the same cognitive hardware, the same capacity for language, abstract reasoning, innovation, and cultural accumulation for at least 200,000 years, why did we spend 190,000 of those years doing essentially nothing? Not nothing, exactly. Hunter-gatherers are not passive. They are active, intelligent, skillful. Their knowledge of their environments is profound and detailed. Their social organizations, while not monumental, are sophisticated. Their oral traditions, their art, their ritual practices, these are not the activities of cognitively limited beings. But they did not build cities. They did not develop agriculture. They did not produce writing, or mathematics, or systematic astronomy. For 190,000 years, 95% of the total existence of our species, these things did not appear. And then, in the blink of a geological eye, approximately 12,000 years ago, everything changed. Agriculture, permanent settlements, megalithic construction, writing, complex social hierarchies, all of it appearing across multiple continents within a few thousand years of each other, as if a switch had been thrown. The standard answer is environmental. The end of the last ice age created favorable conditions: stable climate, predictable seasons, abundance of plant species amenable to domestication, expansion of the ecological zones where complex cultures could develop. The warm, wet, its stable Holocene, the geological epoch we still live in, provided the foundation on which civilization could build. This answer is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because it doesn't explain why civilization appeared simultaneously in multiple unconnected regions. Why agriculture emerged independently in at least 7 or 8 different places: the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, New Guinea, the Sahel of Africa, possibly more, within a few thousand years of each other. Why megalithic construction appeared across Western Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia in the same period. Why astronomical knowledge of impressive sophistication appears in cultures that, by conventional reckoning, had only just stopped being nomadic. The conventional answer, independent invention, were driven by similar environmental conditions, is statistically possible, but strains credulity. When 10 people independently arrive at the same solution to the same problem in the same narrow window of time, the more parsimonious explanation is that they all had access to a common source. The alternative hypothesis, the lost cycles theory, proposes something more radical. It proposes that the beginning of civilization 12,000 years ago was not the first beginning. It was a re-beginning, the start of the current cycle, the moment after the most recent major reset when the survivors of the previous cycle began to reconstruct what had been lost, and that the silence of the previous 190,000 years is not evidence that nothing happened. It is evidence that whatever happened was destroyed. Consider what would survive 190,000 years of time. Even stone structures, if built in zones later covered by glaciers, would be ground to powder by the advancing ice. Coastal settlements, built where all settlements prefer to be built, would be submerged under hundreds of feet of ocean. Metal corrodes, wood rots, written records, if they existed, would survive only under the most unusual preservation conditions. The probability of recovering meaningful archaeological evidence from a civilization that existed even 50,000 years ago and was destroyed by a catastrophe is vanishingly small. We are not finding nothing because there was nothing. We are finding nothing because we have not found a way to look, and because the most likely locations for what we are looking for are inaccessible. The lost cycles hypothesis does not require advanced technology in the sense of smartphones and satellites. It requires only that previous human populations achieved levels of social complexity, agricultural knowledge, and organizational sophistication comparable to what we know existed in the Neolithic period, and that these achievements were destroyed repeatedly by the kinds of catastrophes documented in chapters 2 through 4 of this documentary. Each cycle begins with scattered survivors. Each begins the slow work of reconstruction. Agriculture is rediscovered or remembered imperfectly, as the myths of gods teaching humanity to farm might suggest. Construction techniques are rebuilt from inherited fragments, producing the anomalous precision of Göbekli Tepe, the impossible stones of Baalbek, the polygonal masonry of Sacsayhuaman. Astronomical knowledge is reconstructed from observations and from preserved records, producing the sophisticated calendrical systems of the Maya, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and each cycle reaches a peak, a level of complexity and sophistication that varies, that may sometimes exceed and sometimes fall short of previous peaks, before being destroyed again by the next catastrophe. The myths encode the memory of these cycles. The Hindu Yuga system describes ages of increasing degradation: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, followed by dissolution and a new Satya Yuga, a new golden age, a new beginning. The Hopi four-world narrative describes exactly this pattern of creation, complexity, failure, and reset. The Greek ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each more corrupt than the last, each ending in destruction, each followed by a new beginning, describe the same cycle. These are not philosophical abstractions. They are compressed historical accounts of a pattern that the ancient world experienced and remembered, even if imperfectly, even if buried in mythological language that moderns tend to dismiss. And the genetic record, as we examined in the previous chapter, provides an independent confirmation of the pattern. Multiple population bottlenecks, multiple near extinctions, multiple compression events, each followed by recovery and rebuilding. The fossil record of our own biology maps onto the mythological record of cyclical destruction and rebirth. Both are telling the same story. We have been reset before. Not once, multiple times. The silence of 190,000 years is the silence of civilizations that were built and destroyed and built and destroyed, leaving insufficient traces for us to recognize because we have not looked in the right places, or because the right places are at the bottom of the sea. The question is not whether this happened. The question is, are we approaching the end of the current cycle? And the question after that is, what can we do about it? There is a clock embedded in the structure of the solar system. It runs on a 26,000-year cycle, and the ancient world knew about it, tracked it obsessively, built monuments to preserve the knowledge of it, and may have been trying, across thousands of years of mythological encoding, to warn us about what happens when its hands reach certain positions. The clock is called the precession of the equinoxes. Here is how it works. The Earth is not a perfect sphere. It bulges slightly at the equator, and as a result, the gravitational pull of the Sun and Moon on this bulge causes the Earth's rotational axis to wobble slowly, the way a spinning top wobbles as it slows. This wobble is extremely slow. It takes approximately 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. During this cycle, the orientation of Earth's axis changes relative to the stars, causing what appears to be a slow drift of the constellations relative to the positions of the equinoxes and solstices. In practice, this means that the star at which the Earth's North Pole points changes over millennia. Today, the North Celestial Pole is near Polaris. In 3000 BCE, it was near Thuban. In 14,000 CE, it will be near Vega. The pole star is not fixed. It rotates through its circuit of the sky on this 26,000-year schedule. This also means that the constellation of the zodiac, in which the sun rises on the spring equinox, the astrological age, changes slowly over time. We are currently transitioning from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, a shift that takes approximately 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, the sun rose in Pisces at the spring equinox. Around 4000 BCE, it rose in Taurus. In 6000 BCE, Gemini. In 8000 BCE, Cancer. At 10,000 BCE, approximately the end of the last ice age, the approximate timing of the Younger Dryas impact, the approximate moment that the most recent cycle of civilization appears to have begun. The sun rose in the constellation Leo at the spring equinox, the Sphinx at Giza, the great stone lion facing due east, facing the point on the horizon where the sun rises at the spring equinox. In what age would that alignment have had maximum astronomical significance? In the age of Leo, approximately 10,500 BCE, and 10,500 BCE is, under astronomical precession calculations, the period when the constellation Leo would have been directly above the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox. The time when the Great Sphinx would have been, as Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock proposed in their controversial but widely discussed research, looking at itself in the sky. The builders of the Sphinx, under conventional dating, were the Egyptians of approximately 2500 BCE. But the geological evidence for water erosion on the Sphinx, documented by geologist Robert Schoch, who has made a career of careful, rigorous analysis of the weathering patterns on the monument, suggests that the body of the Sphinx was exposed to prolonged rainfall erosion at a period when the region received substantially more rainfall than it does today. The last time the area around Giza received sufficient rainfall to produce that level of erosion was before approximately 5000 BCE, and possibly as far back as 10,000 to 7,000 BCE. This would place the original construction of the Sphinx in a period well before the conventional attribution to Khafra of the 4th dynasty. The Egyptian traditions themselves speak of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods walked the earth and established the order of civilization. This first time is described in Egyptian texts as occurring long before the historical dynastic period. The keeper of this knowledge was Thoth, the god of writing and wisdom, who is said to have recorded all things in a great book and hidden the records so they would survive the catastrophes of the future. What if the monuments themselves are the book? What if the astronomical alignments of Giza, the Sphinx facing the age of Leo, the pyramids aligned with Orion's belt, as it appeared in 10,500 BCE, the entire complex encoding mathematical relationships and cardinal alignments with a precision that speaks of deep astronomical knowledge, are not decorative or religious, but functional. A calendar, a clock, a message to whoever comes after, written not in a language that can be forgotten, but in the language of mathematics and astronomy, which cannot. The Sumerian king lists ancient records that catalog the rulers of the cities before and after the flood. List kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the Deluge. 8 kings, total, reigning for 241,200 years in the antediluvian period. Conventional scholarship dismisses these numbers as mythological exaggeration. But if you map 241,200 years onto the precessional cycle of 25,920 years, you get almost exactly 9 1/3 great years, the number of precessional cycles that would have elapsed from some distant epoch of human civilization to the current one. Were the Sumerians recording not the literal lifespans of kings, but the astronomical spans of ages? Were the years in the king list's precessional years, each one 25,920 solar years, encoding a deep time calendar in mythological form? The Maya long count calendar, which famously ended a Baktun cycle in 2012, causing worldwide hysteria that fundamentally misunderstood what the calendar was saying, divides time into nested cycles of 20, 360, 7,200, and 144,000 days. The structure of the calendar was not designed to predict apocalypse. It was designed to track very long spans of astronomical time with precision and regularity that reflects a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. The Maya, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Hindus, all of these ancient cultures were obsessed with deep time, with cycles spanning thousands and tens of thousands of years, with astronomical observations that required patience measured not in lifetimes, but in generations. Why? Why would ancient people invest such enormous intellectual and material resources in tracking a precessional cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete, unless they knew what happens at certain points in that cycle, unless they had survived a previous crossing of a dangerous point in the cosmic clock, unless they were trying to warn their successors, pay attention to the sky, because the clock is running, and when the hands reach certain positions, things happen. The Younger Dryas impact occurred at a specific point in the precessional cycle. The rapid climate shifts associated with the end of previous ice ages occurred at specific points in the Milankovitch cycles, the longer astronomical cycles of eccentricity, axial tilt, and precession that govern the rhythm of ice ages and warm periods. These are not random, they are cyclical. They are, in principle, predictable. The ancient world was trying to build prediction systems, not to predict the next harvest or the next flood season, to predict the next catastrophe, the next reset, the next moment when the cosmos turns against human civilization. And now we are here, in the early 21st century. With computational power the ancient world could not have imagined, with satellites and space telescopes and particle accelerators and genomic sequencers, all the instruments of the most sophisticated civilization our species has achieved in this current cycle. Are we any closer to understanding the cosmic clock? Are we tracking the near-Earth asteroids with sufficient diligence? Are we monitoring the sun with the resources the threat demands? Are we cataloging the submarine geography of our planet to find what's buried there? Or are we building our cities on the coast, watching streaming content, buying things we don't need, and assuming that the comfortable stability of the last 70 years of relative peace and prosperity is the natural state of the world? The clock is running. It has always been running. And the ancient world, with its aligned monuments and its cyclical mythologies and its astronomical obsessions, was trying to tell us something that we keep choosing not to hear. Time is not linear. Progress is not guaranteed. Civilizations end, and the cosmic clock does not wait for us to be ready. There is a moment in deep archaeology, a moment that every field researcher who has worked at a truly ancient site will recognize, when the abstract becomes visceral. When the carbon date on a fragment of bone, or the stratigraphy of a soil profile, or the orientation of a monument suddenly stops being data and becomes something else entirely. It becomes presence. The presence of someone who stood where you are standing, who looked at what you are looking at, who built or spoke or lived or died in this specific place, and who is gone so completely that the only trace they left is this fragment, this orientation, this layer of charcoal in the earth. This documentary has tried to argue that the fragments are more numerous and more meaningful than we have been taught to believe. That the myths are not superstition, but testimony. That the ruins are not decorative, but diagnostic. That the silence in the timeline is not emptiness, but the negative space left by civilizations we have not yet learned to see. Let's bring it together. The flood myths, 500 of them, globally distributed, structurally identical, preserve the memory of real coastal catastrophes caused by real sea level rise at the end of real ice ages. They are the most widely distributed and most consistently structured narrative in human culture, and their persistence across every branch of the human family tree argues for a common experiential origin. Something happened. The coasts drowned. People survived and remembered, and they remembered across 10,000 years. The Younger Dryas impact, documented in the geological and sedimentary record across 4 continents, provides a mechanism for the catastrophic end of whatever culture was flourishing in North America, Western Europe, and the Middle East approximately 12,800 years ago. The impact hypothesis is not yet consensus science, but the physical evidence, the iridium layer, the nanodiamonds, the spherules, the charcoal, is real and widespread and has been confirmed in peer-reviewed journals by researchers at major universities on multiple continents. Something happened. Something large and cosmic and devastating happened at exactly the moment that the most recent version of human prehistory was reset. The solar threat is not historical. It is ongoing. The Carrington event of 1859 is a documented fact, preserved in the records of every telegraph system on Earth. The larger events preserved in ice cores are documented facts of atmospheric chemistry. The vulnerability of modern electrical civilization to a sufficient geomagnetic storm is not a fringe claim. It is the conclusion of risk assessments conducted by FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security, and national security agencies in multiple countries. This threat is real, active, and inadequately addressed. The stone structures, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, Pumapunku, are physical facts that do not disappear when conventional archaeology looks away. The precision of their construction, the scale of the engineering, the anomalous sophistication of the craft. These are measurable quantities, documented by engineers and architects who have examined the sites with professional instruments. The conventional explanations struggle. The alternative explanation that these structures preserve the knowledge and techniques of a previous, more advanced culture is not inherently less plausible than the assertion that pre-literate hunter-gatherers spontaneously invented precision stone engineering. The submarine geography of the planet's continental shelves remains almost entirely unexplored. 3 million square miles of previously inhabitable land lies beneath our oceans, and we have not meaningfully searched it. This is the most important archaeological project that has never been seriously undertaken. The out-of-place artifacts, the Antikythera mechanism, the Piri race map, the Baghdad Battery are documented objects that exist in museums and archives that have been independently verified as genuine artifacts of their claimed periods, and that contain information or demonstrate capabilities that conventional historical timelines cannot account for. They are not myths, they are things, and things don't lie. The genetic record of human population bottlenecks is hard science, published in leading peer-reviewed journals, confirmed by multiple independent research groups using different methodologies. The Toba bottleneck is not contested. The additional ancient bottleneck identified in 2023 is based on rigorous genomic analysis. Our genetics tell us unambiguously that we have been nearly erased before, that our species has been compressed to a remnant and rebuilt, that we are not the uninterrupted inheritors of a 200,000-year tradition, but the descendants of survivors, and the precessional clock, the great year of 26,000 years, is not mythology. It is elementary astronomy, verifiable with any telescope and any ephemeris. The ancient world tracked it. The ancient world built monuments aligned to its cycles. The ancient world preserved knowledge of it across thousands of years of cultural transmission. And they did so with the kind of obsessive, resource-intensive dedication that people reserve for things that matter enormously, for things that determine survival or extinction. They were watching the clock because they knew what the clock could do. So where does this leave us? It leaves us standing at what may be another turn of the wheel. And not because of mysticism or prophecy, but because of patterns. The same patterns that have preceded previous resets are present in our world today. Climate destabilization. Not the first time climate has changed catastrophically. The geological record is a history of climate lurching between states, but the first time a civilization has been large enough and resource-consumptive enough to be simultaneously a cause and a victim of that instability. Technological overextension. We have built systems of incomprehensible complexity and interconnection, systems on which all 8 billion of us depend absolutely, and we do not fully understand those systems. We cannot fully control them, and we have introduced into those systems, in the form of artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and various emerging technologies, elements whose behavior over time we cannot reliably predict. Social fragmentation, the fracturing of shared narrative, of common epistemology, of the ability to agree on basic facts and coordinate responses to shared threats. This is not a political observation. It is a structural one. Complex civilizations require coordination. Coordination requires trust. Trust requires shared frameworks of reality. Ours are eroding. Resource depletion. We are consuming the accumulated biological and geological capital of the planet at rates that cannot be sustained. Not slowly, not gradually, at rates that would have been considered civilizationally suicidal by any previous culture that thought about it carefully. And looming behind all of this, the threats we don't control, the asteroid catalog that is still incomplete, the solar cycle that operates on its own schedule, the supervolcanic systems that are overdue by geological reckoning, the submarine methane clathrates that could destabilize under continued ocean warming. This is not defeatism. This is not an invitation to despair. This is the message that the stone sentinels, the flood myths, the processional monuments, and the DNA of our species are all trying to deliver simultaneously. Pay attention. The world has ended before. It will end again, in some form, for some version of us. The question is not whether the reset comes. The question is what we do with the time before it. The people who survived previous resets, the handful of individuals who walked out of the catastrophe, carrying whatever knowledge they could hold in their heads and their hands, did something remarkable. They remembered. They preserved. They taught. They built structures designed to outlast not just their own lives, but the civilizations of their descendants. They encoded warnings in stone, in star alignments, in mathematical constants, in mythological cycles, in genetic memory, in the architecture of fear. They left everything they could for us. And now the question is whether we will leave anything for whoever comes after us, not just the accumulated knowledge of our civilization, though that is urgently worth preserving, in forms more durable than server farms and hard drives, but the specific, targeted, hard-won wisdom of what can destroy a civilization and what can survive it. We should be building comprehensive, distributed, format-agnostic archives of essential human knowledge, not stored digitally, carved in stone, etched in metal, printed on acid-free paper, and sealed in climate-controlled vaults. The knowledge of how to grow food, purify water, generate energy, treat disease, maintain social cohesion. The knowledge of what threats exist and how to monitor them. The knowledge of what happened before. We should be investing seriously in the detection and deflection of near-Earth objects, in solar monitoring and space weather prediction, in the understanding of our planet's geological vulnerabilities. We should be looking at the ocean floor. We should be funding the search for what is buried there. Because the answers to our questions about who we are and where we came from may be waiting for us in the continental shelf sediment, patient and preserved, and those answers may include warnings more specific and more urgent than anything we have found on land. And we should be taking seriously the possibility that we are not the first. That the story of humanity is longer and stranger and more cyclical than our current knowledge suggests. That the ruins we cannot explain and the myths we cannot dismiss are not embarrassments to be rationalized away, but messages to be decoded. Because if civilization has been reset before, it can be reset again. And if the people of the previous cycles left us everything they could, every warning they could encode in every medium that might survive, then the least we can do is listen. Look at the stars, the same stars that Sumerian astronomers tracked across millennia of precessional time, the same stars that the builders of Göbekli Tepe encoded in stone pillars 12,000 years ago. The same stars that every culture that has ever existed has looked up at in wonder and in warning. look at the stones. The ones that shouldn't exist, built by hands whose tools we cannot identify for purposes we have not fully decoded. They are not decorations. They are not monuments to ego. They are messages. Letters from the previous cycle addressed to whoever has eyes to read them. And look at each other. Because the one thing that has survived every reset, the one thing that cannot be destroyed as long as a single person is left to carry it, is the human capacity to remember, to teach, and to begin again. We are the children of every survivor who ever walked out of a catastrophe and chose to build something rather than surrender to the dark. That is who we are. That is where we come from. And if we are paying attention, if we are finally willing to hear what the myths and the stones and the stars and our own DNA have been trying to tell us, then maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time we break the cycle. Maybe this time we remember. If this documentary made you think, if even one question it raised is one you can't stop turning over, then you are already doing the most important thing. You are paying attention. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, not to frighten them, to start the conversation. Because the conversation is the beginning of everything. And every civilization that ever existed was built on conversations that someone had the courage to start. Subscribe, comment, tell us which chapter hit hardest, which question you most want explored, which evidence you found most compelling or most questionable. This documentary is a beginning, not an end. The research continues, the questions deepen, and the next video will go further. The stones are still standing. The ocean floor is still unexplored. The stars are still turning on their 26,000-year clock. And the question is still open. Are we the last? Or are we the ones who finally figured it out?